Greetings and welcome to another edition of Klamath Memories, an oral history program presented by the Klamath County Museum. My name is Todd Keppel. I'm museum manager for Klamath County, and tonight our subject is the history of the Henley community. Joining us for this program is a fifth-generation Henley resident, Richard Fairclo. Richard, thanks for being with us for this program.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, I just want to express our appreciation to the Klamath County Board of Commissioners for allowing us to use their facilities here in the County Government Center, and to the County IT Department for providing staff for us to make this program available. And of course, we're always thankful to the taxpayers of Klamath County for supporting history and heritage programs that we do at the museum. I'd also like to mention that if at any point during our program, as it's being cablecast live today on the 9th of April 2013, if anyone viewing us happens to have a question or a comment about the history of the Henley area, you can email us at klamathhistory@gmail.com, and we'll receive your email here and respond to it. You can also watch this program and all of our other previous Klamath Memories programs online at klamathmemories.com. So as we get ready to talk about history of the Henley community, Richard, I think you wanted to start with a map of the area to sort of define the area. Is that correct?
I actually wanted to start with something to give perspective, but before we go to 47 and 48, I'd like to say that I've got a lot of visual aids tonight. We hope to get through them. I wanted to give some credit to the Klamath County Museum. Thank you for the great archiving that's being done by Lynn and others over there. Barbara Whitlatch for providing a newspaper article, Dan Leahy for photographs, and the Shaw Historical Library has a good source of photographs online, which I tapped. I also want to thank Sharon Fairclo, my wife, for archaeological finds at the Henley Ranch headquarters location. My sources were some books, an old deed, and stories from my family, both living and deceased, and Barbara Whitlatch, Dr. Ron Short, Harry Orm, Howard Manning, Taylor High, and others who I may remember to mention. And tonight I'd also hope to get some help from the audience. We've got two quiz questions to help me. One is to identify an artifact found at the Henley Ranch headquarters, and another is the information or location photographs of the early crossing of the Henley Slough or Lost River Slough near Highway 39 by a county road that was built in the 1880s, and also of the Ankeny-Henley Canal, which was also built in the 1880s and carried water all the way from Upper Klamath Lake down Link River to halfway to Merrill. So if we could go 47 and 48. Right?
So we've got a photo that you brought that shows the area a little bit beyond Henley. I think this is down towards like in the Lost River area around Bloody Point.
What we're seeing there is actually water. That's Tule Lake. And when I went online hunting for photographs of homesteads, I found a lot of photographs of homesteads at Tule Lake. Well, by the time Tule Lake was drained, Henley area had already been homesteaded, settled, and irrigation systems completed. So that is an old photograph. It's taken after 1900, just after 1900. But the perspective, and my grandparents, George and Myler Stevenson, actually homesteaded there after World War I. But the area we're talking about was homesteaded much earlier, and the settlers used different acts than that. That particular photograph has a lot of historical significance. That's Tule Lake, the water still behind that person, and they're attempting to drain that. And that date on that photograph, I think, is 1908. And the Henley area had already had irrigation projects completed, as did some other areas around Merrill. But that's unusual because that photograph shows water draining into a lava tube. They're trying to drain Tule Lake, and they found that. They call that the glory hole, and nobody knows where that water went.
Sure, it ended up in Central California, right, where they really...
There was a concern, and that was one of the reasons for the Klamath River Compact, I'm sure. And there's still interest in how the groundwater flows that direction, because the Merrill water system is being challenged by the Water Resources Department, saying that it actually drains to Klamath River. So that, I wanted to make sure that that was clarified, and Henley was settled and homesteaded much earlier, and we're ready to move to the map that Todd referred to. There's many settlers, and I'm not trying to make an exhaustive list, but I did remember names that I've been told, like the Shorts, the Fairclos, the Hilliards, Dillingers, Hills, Dixons, Highs, Bears, Ferbers.
Richard, grab your microphone here, would you?
Rename some of those early settlers in the Henley area: Fairclos, Hilliards, Shorts, Dillingers, Hills, Dixons, Highs, Bears.
Turn your microphone on now, and then I think we'll be,
It's on.
is it? Do we have sound?
We okay? I did what I was supposed to. Did you get the earlier names?
Let's do it one more time. Just
Shorts, Fairclos, Hilliards, Dillingers, Hills, Dixons, Highs, Bears, Ferbers, Andersons, Haleys, Blooming Camps, Berries, Kilgores, Henleys, Browns, Campbells, Matneys, and Sheens, and I'm sure that people in this audience and watching can think of several others. If you live in the basin, you probably know descendants of many of the settlers. This particular map is of the modern times. We tried to draw on some things. You notice that, like, Dillinger Road is named after homesteaders. The Spring Lake Schoolhouse, located across road in Spring Lake Road. My grandmother taught there when she was a young girl. And we'll get into the school issues later. Mount Lakei Church and the Mac store was located in this area. This is a more limited area. Over here at Reeder Road, you notice these roads like Dillinger, Reeder, and Short were named after early settlers. The Short Road isn't named Short because it's only a mile long. It's named after that family. Dr. Ron Short lives there, and their barn was used for school purposes. Reeder Road at this area was also known as Kilgore Lane. Ralph Hill, a famous athlete from Henley, in the 5,000 meter, won the silver medal in the Olympics. And Dan O'Brien, the greatest athlete in the world for many years at the decathlon, including gold medals, grew up here near Wilson Dam. Wilson Dam and Wilson Bridge. The Henley area is here, where Henley School is located, was homesteaded or otherwise early settled by a guy named William Steele, and his daughter married Jim Henley and brought him up, and they bought 320 acres across the way. The early settlement was included the challenges that the Indians had already had, which was they were challenged by being able to survive through the winters, and that meant that there had to be food sources to get them through the winter. The Indians already here used a lot of wokus, and they used gathering of suckers, and they would dry the suckers. They had various camps located in the basin. When the settlers came in, this map is designed to understand the importance of the settlement in order to get any sort of food source. The early settlers realized that we were blessed with a lot of water, even though we were blessed with almost no rain and very cold weather. Each year that the water receded in the spring, the grasses and tules and those things would be hayed and put up by hand and horses to be able to feed the cattle, and then they would also put the cattle in there. And without those hand put up haystacks, you remember seeing photographs of and it should be a separate topic on how that hay was put up by the horses and humans. The reason that this photograph is here, then, you can see that much of the area was in a swamp situation, and there was actually a slough called Lost River Slough, or the Henley Slough, that ran all the way from Lost River clear over to the Klamath River, and that could run either direction depending on flood circumstances.
I think
And-
we're going to need to zoom in on that map a little bit if we can, because there's a feature at the top of the map I'd like to point out. If you could slide that map down a little bit so we see the very top part of it. And what we're looking for is the Ankeny Canal. You can see that in the upper right-hand portion of the screen now. And also next to it, the main canal. And so this illustrates that the old Ankeny Canal, which, what did you say, Richard, that was constructed in the 1880s or thereabouts?
One of the reasons, yes, that's correct. Mr. Steele, who was from Ireland, somehow made it from Ireland to Henley, where the present site of Henley School is. And he quickly realized that in order to really survive the winters and to have the area flourish agriculturally, that we needed water. And his plan was implemented and began by coming from Upper Klamath Lake, which is up off at Link River. He was able to crib it, and on that steep side you can still walk up the Link River and locate the Ankeny Canal that would hold water today. It's difficult to walk to, but if you're willing to hike that, you can see that. And it ran all the way through behind the Baldwin Museum, Branch Museum, to the Klamath County Museum, on over to where, kind of behind the Medical Dental Building, and then, as Todd pointed out on that map, all the way out through the suburbs, continuing on through the suburbs, and there was a branch that went all towards Olean. And this was in the 1880s. And then there was another branch that went presently where the A7 canal is, pretty much through the Henley Ranch, and somehow crossed the Henley Slough. And that's one of the assignments. Please find information how they crossed the Henley Slough, the Lost River Slough there, which is located on Highway 39 between the existing concrete flume, which does the same purpose, crosses that slough area, and the Burlington Northern Railroad. Somehow there was a county road built there then, and there was a slough that went across there, went through Thompson's Place, Siemens Thompson Place, southward, went all the way down to Matney and Sheen Road intersection there at Highway 39.
So let me just rephrase the question there to make sure I'm following you here. There was a slough or a low spot where water could move between Lost River and Klamath River during extremely wet periods. And somehow, in order to get irrigation water from the Ankeny ditch from Upper Klamath Lake over the top of that slough, they had to create or construct some kind of what's the word for that, a flume, to get the water across that low spot. But we don't have any photos of that flume, nor do we know exactly where it would have been located. We have a pretty general idea, is that right?
I could walk you very close to where it had to be, because the A7 canal presently ends at the slough, which
Okay,
is now
well.
number one drain.
So if anybody out there has that photo of the old original flume, that would be great to see. Well, so you mentioned suckers a few minutes ago, and the drying of suckers. Do we have more to say about that?
We do. Just because we happen to have a good photograph that Todd located at the museum, is a string of sucker fish, and this is an encampment on Lost River, the best I can tell, near Lincoln Gabriel's place, below, just downstream from Olean's store. And I was unable to get a hold of Lincoln on the phone to have him be able to comment on this. And then there's a good photograph which is taken on the other side of the river near
Before you leave that
Pittsburgh.
photo,
Yes.
Before you leave that photo, I just want to point out that in the photo, you can see people camped on both sides of the river, tents, wagons, teams of horses, and newspaper accounts tell us that both Indians and white folks gathered about this time of year when the suckers were running to gather fish and dry them on racks. And so this is one photo that we really enjoy studying, to see the migration not only of the fish, but of the people to harvest the fish there at Olean Gap.
That's very good. And during that transition time when the Indians were gathering suckers, the the pioneer settlers were also in place, and some of us know the Berries who lived, as I understand it from my mother, near Nuss Lake, between Nuss Lake and where Wilson Dam is now. And so here's another photograph of a good string of suckerfish that they will dry to help them for their food source over the winter. And then the Berry household in the back, and as near as I can tell, that's the background. When William Steele and the others recognized that we needed to have better irrigation, in fact, we needed irrigation in order to have any agricultural pursuits, but they really were upbeat about it and knew really they could produce a lot. And here's an example of an early project, and this is Lost River, which we'll get a better idea of where it is. But look at this. This particular location must have been shallow, and they supplemented it with rocks and cribs. But look at just amazing to me how sturdy the construction was. And Sharon and I have reviewed the boards that are at the Henley Ranch, and the rough-cut timbers in the 1880s were huge. And it's amazing that they would. And my guess is that they would have to revisit that every year when it flooded, probably because the flooding would take place so high that must have been another 20 feet up in order to get clear back over and flood over to the Klamath River.
Now, in that photo, it shows a bridge in the background, and that bridge is where the present-day Reeder Road Bridge is. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. The second photograph is very good. This is the same view of that water wheel, only from up on the hill. And this Lost River, of course, and this bridge that Todd referred to was called the Wilson Bridge. And this is known now as Reeder Road. When my parents were taking out some of the trees along Reeder Road in the 1950s, old-timers came by and said that this was known as Kilgore Lane, and that they were sorry to see the trees go because they used to go there and have picnics and race wagons as a little kid. I remember they had wagon races there.
I think the county fair was held out there one year, at least one year.
And why the Kilgores were always up by Clear Lake, but that was known as Kilgore Lane. So this road here, this has been replaced, but this is also an excellent photo. You can see the Olean Gap in the background. This particular area, and you can see the part of the flume the water wheel would turn and dump water into this flume, and it would run that direction. And it runs on this location is the D Canal. And today there is a dam over here called the Horseshoe Dam or the Wilson Dam or the Diversion Dam, which mimics that slough that I just mentioned before, and has the Diversion Canal runs along here, and it runs all the way on over to the Klamath River, and it can flow either direction. It's an amazing little feature of that, and they're able to bring water from either direction and go into the Lost River with it. But now this whole thing has been replaced by the D Canal, which runs off of from the KID headquarters, kind of, and it stops and siphons underneath the Diversion Canal and underneath the river, and comes out and continues on south. So this early project was mimicking part of what was later incorporated into the Klamath project.
Well, I've always been amazed in the time that I've lived here that engineers and before engineers, just plain old farmers, were able to figure out how to make water run for miles on an almost level grade and yet come out at the place where they needed it. It's pretty remarkable engineering.
That's correct. And so there's a big long transition period from the natural irrigation being the only way to be able to feed the cattle. And the water wheel is a good example of it. And the Ankeny-Henley Canal, which is really started by William Steele, is another good example. And I think, I'm not sure, but number 7 is going to be the next photograph.
Yeah, this shows, I recognize that right off. We have a number of photos very similar to this. That would be the Ankeny Canal.
That's correct. That's the Henley-Ankeny Canal, started by William Steele. They initially started that in the early 1880s and ran a little bit of water to the town site of Klamath Falls. But by 1885, 1888, in that area, it had been expanded to this size. And when you walk there, that is a steep thing, and it was all done by horsework. And we'll see some real interesting ways that they were able to do some of that work. But obviously, a lot of that was done with shovels.
Well,
and
yeah,
mules.
we know that not all of it was done with horses, because we do have at least one picture that shows guys out there with picks chipping away at the side of that hill for that.
That's right.
canal.
And that last photo was taken in the Link River. So when you walk the Link River Trail, you can still see the grade, and if you're adventuresome, go to the other side and get into that canal.
Well, yeah, just to make sure we're communicating clearly on that, if you're on the Link River Trail on the west side of the canyon, you can look across the canyon and you'll see this line going across the hillside, and that is the Ankeny Canal. So like you say, if you are venturesome and can find your way over there, it is on public, well, it's on Pacific Corps property, but you know, people can go there and explore, and you can find that old canal and walk along it. There's an old car that ran down the hill and ended up in that canal, and it's still there from like the 1950s, I think it is. So, and that has nothing to do with irrigation. But back to the Henleys.
But it would hold water, and it runs about the same flow, it looks to me like, as the Sea Canal runs today. So the Henleys, we're going to do Henleys next, and that is a photograph of James T. Henley. The Henleys and these early pioneers had a really good spirit, and they were positive, and they had faith that things could work. And they traveled from long distances to get to where they were settling. And James T. Henley is no exception to that. An example of that spirit also is that my great-grandfather, Paul Fairclo, was enamored and had migrated from New Jersey to Illinois, and then the westward movement was coming into its own. He was so focused on getting away from the poverty and the dust of the cities, according to the accounts of the time, and understood the politicians. There was a politician named Horace Greeley that you may have remembered from history, and he was not only a famous abolitionist of slaves, he was also a proponent of settling, of getting people out of the poverty in the cities in the East and settling. And Paul liked that guy so much that he named his son Horace Greeley Fairclo, and both of them got out to Henley and through the Willamette Valley, and were on that Fairclo homestead out there. And my sister and I were the fifth generation to live on that.
I might just jump in here, if I may, Richard, and remind folks that you're watching an episode of the Klamath Memories program presented by the Klamath County Museum. We're recording this program, broadcasting this program on the Klamath County Government Channel on the 9th of April, 2013. And our subject is the history of the Henley community. Our guest is Richard Fairclo, fifth-generation resident of the Henley area. And I think we have some more photos of the Henley family to look at.
Correct. We can stream through these photographs that are relevant to the Henley Ranch itself. There's 4 generations of women there, all of them strong people. Taylor High and my mother knew the baby on the left. She was born in Paris, France, by her mother on the right, and the woman in the middle was so patriotic that she couldn't stand that this person would be born, her granddaughter would be born in a foreign country, and she sent dirt from the USA, presumably from Henley, so that that baby could be born and set her first feet on U.S. soil. But Mrs. Henley in the middle there was actually William Steele's daughter, so there was the connection there, and she turned out to be a very tough negotiator with the Klamath Project when the Klamath Project bought out the Henley-Ankeny Canal, and she and her partner, the Ankenys, got, I think, $150,000 in 1905 money, and I think that caused some animosity because the project had to repay that. I'll read a little bit as you go ahead and stream on through, Lynn, if you could. They were born, William Steele, by the way, was born in Ireland, and he ended up there. Jim Henley was born in, I think, Indiana through Reno. A lot of them, including some of my ancestors, were involved in mining. James T. Henley that we saw was county commissioner from June 1892 to 98. He took an active interest. That is, you can recognize the hills in the background as being the, this is actually running cows on the Henley Ranch. If you were able to study that photo, would probably see the Siemens Thompson place behind. Okay, the irrigation was in its infancy. They simply had to clear, they thought, this was the positive attitude, they simply had to clear the sagebrush, plow, seed, water the sandy soil, and with little care there was an abundance of vegetation for stock and man. And they weren't kidding, but there was some really very difficult times, and I talked earlier about surviving the winters. And one thing that Jack Liskey and many others gave me information about was the winter of 1889. And they call it the hard winter, 1889. It was extremely hard to survive. And the Henley Ranch was making many experiments in crops, and they were able to gain great success in that. But one of the things that they tried after they were irrigating was the purchase of 600 cows, and they moved 600 cows to and bought enough hay to winter them. And it was all in one, they located it all in one place. I think the hay stacks were already there, just north of Klamath Falls at Naylox. And by the time the winter got through, the cows died, almost all of them. The cows froze to death, the calves died. You couldn't get water to them. They were inside of the haystacks, and they still died. And it was just a horrid event, and they were able to drive only 100 cattle back to the Henley Ranch, where they saved them with rutabagas, carrots, potatoes, and cabbage, which they had stored underneath the ground in cellars, I guess they call it. So there was a good indication that there was a lot of irrigation at that time. The photograph that was just up there, I want to read. In about the 1930s, the Whitlatches bought most of the Henley Ranch from Mrs. Henley. And in around 1950, the Henley Ranch, by the way, was quite a landmark. They had the first telephone, people would go use it. They had the first copper bathtub and plumbing out in that area, and so they were kind of a different. And the Whitlatches, including Paul and Barbara Whitlatch, lived at the Henley Ranch headquarters. And this photo, I'm going to read the caption here, because it wasn't a destruction of the Henley landmark house. It was a trifurcation. They moved this house into 3 pieces, left one on that ranch, moved one to Airway Drive, moved one piece, third piece to Henley Road, where they still are, and they still survive. This caption reads, "The old Henley house at Henley was pulled and torn apart last week to be replaced by a new building. The old building has long been a historical landmark in the Klamath area and once was the central headquarters for one of the basin's greatest ranches. While wreckers were ripping at the old building, they came on a newspaper which predicted Grover Cleveland would win his election. The paper was published in 1888. Cleveland lost that election." So the wood we're finding on the place and these nails are from this construction era, really good quality wood with good grain. The house was finally taken down in about 10 years ago by Dan Leahy. So even at the ranch headquarters, that landmark house lasted into 3 different centuries.
If I could jump in here a little bit, we want to digress a little bit just for a moment, remind our viewers that if you're watching this program live on the 9th of April, 2013, you're welcome to email us with questions or comments. You can email us at klamathhistory@gmail.com, and we'll get that email right here in the Government Center and respond to any emails that we might get. I wanted to also show something, Richard, that we found just today in the museum. We're going through our newspaper archives and found this clipping from January of 1959, when the Herald and News reported that a new store was being built at Mac's Store, the corner of, that's a Crossroad, right? Crossroad and Highway 39?
Correct, right next to Mount Lake Church.
Right, and so this was the original Mac's Store, constructed in 1912, and according to the caption on this photo, it reads that it was put up by the late J.S. McClellan and was a meeting place for many years for neighbors. And if I remember right, Richard, you said you had some acquaintance with or knew of someone who knew the McClellans.
Yeah, the Mac was for McClellans, and if I have my family history right, my grandmother came out and lived with her relatives, the McClellans, while she taught at the Spring Lake School, which is just 2 miles, I guess, to the west of the store location, and lived with them in Klamath Falls.
So last year would have been the centennial for Mac's Store. I hope I didn't miss any big celebrations or anything out there. I
think
wonder if they even knew.
Mac's Store and Mount Lake Church can be revived as community gathering places, and the Mac's Store is still in operation, as is the church. There was, I think, a photo or 2 more of the Henley house. That is Ron Whitlatch, one of the airmen brothers of the Whitlatch family that came back after World War II. And that is the Henley landmark house there. Okay, so by the turn of the century, we're still not up to draining Tule Lake, and Henley was already doing quite a bit. It had schools and that sort of thing. I'm hoping to actually locate the naming of the school before I get to the Klamath project area. Okay, the school at Pine Grove, and we're going to have but this is the last portion of the Henley house that was finally had to be torn down, and that is the 1880s rough cut lumber, square nails, that's sawdust for insulation. He said it smelled just as fresh as the day it was sawed, and this was in 2010, about 28 or something. One of the quizzes for the audience is nails. We think we can identify square nails, and of course they were important, but there's one of these artifacts that Sharon found that I have a hard time identifying what it was, and we'll be able to see that as on the screen. And so that's the second quiz. Where was the slough crossing for Ankeny Henley Canal and the county school, which was also, the county road across the slough was where Mrs. Henley moved her house in 1886. It was a new county road at the time, and somehow she was able to move it across the slough to the present location where we're living.
Now, you mentioned artifacts. Do we have examples of the artifacts you're talking about?
On the screen, I hope. So the quiz is square nails. Everybody can recognize that thing on the right, though. That pointy head or whatever it is, I'm a little bit confused about. I can't quite identify it. I'm probably not going to try to get the rust off to help. And so that's the quiz. Maybe we can get some help. That's the second question.
My guess is it's a Cornhusker, for what it's worth.
looks like that.
I don't know.
Naming of the Henley School, and then we'll get to the project photographs. The school at Pine Grove was moved to a piece of land consisting of 10 acres, which was bought from Ed Bloomingcamp, but that place was part of the William Steele 320 acres, Mrs. Henley's father's place. The school children all knew Mrs. Henley, as did their parents. Her home contributed much to the social life of the school. Costumes for plays, stage settings, flowers, decorations of many kinds, tools, and even last-minute refreshments were freely and cheerfully given. The most important item was water from the well at the back door. Water was not found to be palatable in any place on the school's 10 acres.
Boy, that sounds familiar.
Large milk cans of drinking water were taken every morning, and often cans of milk. This was a medium of more friendly chats and better acquaintances. It seems little wonder that when the district was to be named, Mrs. Bradbury and C. Short, her friends on the school board, suggested the name Henley. So there's why the school's named Henley, even though there was a lot of settlers in the area. Dr. Ron Short says that may have been somebody nicknamed Big Lum Short, and I guess there was a little Lum Short too, I don't know. But that is also important because prior to the transportation, all these schools that we hopefully get time to view on the screen were central community things. And as the transportation got better, then the schools were either moved physically, like the Pine Grove, or they were later utilized. Getting on, we're going to spend some time with the project development, and this particular photograph is a good example of no irrigation in the front, and in the background, yes, irrigation. They've got very viable crop ground, and my dad and other farmers say, well, look at that sagebrush, it's pretty big, that's not bad soil. If we can put water on that, we're going to be able to grow something, and that's what they did across the fence. And that's, so from the standpoint of why the project was going.
These photos that we're looking at right now, we have a series of them taken in 1907, I think by a government photographer. 1907 was the first year that crops were grown with irrigation from the Klamath project. And so it's amazing to see what a transformation it brought about just in the first year.
No question about it, and we can just go ahead and stream photographs as fast as we can through this area. I just wanted to say that, and look at that produce on the screen there. That is healthy produce, and it's that's kind of like the heirloom seed that we should have for today. And this is, instead of suckers storing through the winter, we're storing crops this way. I wanted to add, much of this is going to be after the project, and Klamath County has a tradition of some controversy. And this courthouse across the street, can you imagine having two courthouses? We've had a lot of controversy. There was controversies over which courthouse was going to survive, and there was a lot of resistance to the project. This is Japanese housing. We're talking about schools getting moved in the Henley area as well as the rest of the areas. This housing that was in World War II for the Japanese concentration camp near Tule Lake. These houses were moved around and were used for residences by homesteaders and many other uses.
And there's still quite a few out there, isn't that correct?
Yeah, there is. They were always fun to recognize.
Well, Richard, we're already about two-thirds of the way through our program. We're going to have to budget our time here. I'd just like to let our viewers know one last time that you're watching an episode of Klamath Memories, oral history program presented by the Klamath County Museum. We'd love to hear from anyone who might be watching this program live. If there's anybody out there at all watching us and you have any questions or comments, please send them to klamathhistory@gmail.com. And again, you can view this program and all of our previous programs online at klamathmemories.com. So we've got, let's see, looks like a photo taken somewhere out in the Henley area. Are we going to go to photo number 36?
Well, while we're on that photograph, this is a nice transition photograph, really. If you look closely on the left, you can see a train. If you look closely on the left, you can also see, in fact, there also, you can see haystacks put up in loose stacks, possibly by horse-drawn means, and then the road. So the whole basin was being transformed.
This photo, by the way, if we could just stick with that photo for a minute, is taken on what is now Highway 39, and the train obviously is on the OC&E Railroad, and there's a little bit of a hill that we're on, so this hill would be about where Klamath, the cemetery that's out there, not Klamath Memorial Park, but Eternal Hills, thank you. Cemetery is about where this photo would be taking, looking north, probably somewhere around 1920. And of course, the hillside there in the background is the higher hill is the summit of Hogback Mountain. And of course, that area is all built up with houses and businesses now. But yeah, I think that road was improved in 1920. In fact, could I tell my road story real quick here? Dick, I've got a photo. Lynn, if you could, or Dave, come grab this photo. We used this as a mystery photo in the Herald and News some time back. We'd like to identify exactly where this picture was taken and who's in the photo, and we weren't able to get any responses on this photo, but we're pretty sure that it was taken somewhere out in the Henley area, because in the background, just to the left of the tent, I don't know if it'll show up on the screen on television or not, but there's some hills in the background that would indicate Little Aspen Butte and Aspen Butte. So I think, judging by the hills in the background, this doesn't show up very well on the TV screen. This was taken somewhere in the Henley area. It is a work camp of some kind, and my guess is that this photo was taken at the time they were building the new road that went from Klamath Falls past Henley down towards Malin, which was a road that was, again, a subject of considerable controversy and opposed vehemently by the ranchers in the Henley area. I love to tell this story whenever we take a bus tour and go past the Henley area. Mrs. Henley and a number of other residents there sued the county in an effort to block that road from going through. And so every time we drive down Highway 39 past Henley, we can just imagine the times back in 1920 when it was the farmers versus the county commissioners over that road. And eventually, in this lawsuit, it was alleged that the farmers actively tried to hamper construction of the road by turning irrigation water into the area where the construction was taking place. And the road was completed except for about a 2-mile stretch where there was continual trouble with water being turned in on the construction area. And it says in one spot here that water was let loose a few nights ago on the camp of J.W. Mormon, subcontractor, and the crew, that is the road construction crew, was forced to get out in the night and dike their tents to keep their beds and belongings from being soaked. So, pretty active farmers in the Henley area. I don't know if that spirit of rebellion still persists out there in the Henley area.
I can vouch for, without naming names, that I know people, or at least one person, who has been arrested for irrigating the highway. We might as well,
Better move on.
while we're moving and skipping most of the project and going to photograph 15 and serious of those, I wanted to say that in the building of the project, it was almost all done with mules and that sort of thing. My grandfather has a story of the mules being if anybody doubts that mules are smart, they would knew when to stop, and they'd had to unhook the Fresno scrapers for the day because the mules knew when to stop.
Must have been Union mules, huh?
Union mules, yeah, maybe. That would have infuriated the population, I'm sure. We're now going to spend some time with the schools. This happens to be Henley School on the top, and a portion of the school that I attended when I was in grade school, they added two parts to it. The top one may look familiar to you because it's now located, confirmed by Luther Horsley, at the Midland, as a Midland Community Center, where we've had class reunions and other things. The ability to move those types of buildings around is kind of surprising to me, but that is what they did. There were local school boards. There were schools at Swan Lake, Po Valley, both upper and lower parts of Po Valley, we have photographs of many of these. Taylor High confirms that there was 3 schools at Olean. He attended the 3rd one before going to high school at Henley. The first one was actually above the flume, he says, up on the bluff there. The 3rd one, which he attended, is still in existence, and it shows on that photograph there, the lower one, and it is used as the the Olean Meeting Hall. There are many others. There's one out at Spring Lake, which we may have time to see. There was one at the town of Gale, Malin, of course. Many nice-looking schools, like at the Kirk. Kirk was really because of the railroad population up there, but Kirk is the lower part of the Williamson River Marsh. At Derry, at Plevna, and possibly a lot more. As the transportation improved, such as is there, the parents didn't have to worry about the kids getting to school as much because they could take automobiles and not walk or take horses.
This next photo I think we're going to look at shows the school at Spring Lake. It's a very small photo, but hopefully it'll show up well on the projection screen. And this building stood until fairly recently.
That's correct. You can't see any sign of it anymore, but you used to be able to go drive by that. It's at the intersection of Spring Lake Road and Cross Road, the southwest.
Lynn, if we could make a little jump here to another building that's very similar to that, photo number 23, and you can probably put them both on the screen at the same time. It shows 2 old school buildings, both of which, if I understand you correctly, Richard, you're saying both these schools eventually were merged into the Henley area. And so 2 different buildings, but very similar construction here. So here's the Miller Hills School. And this school stood where the Midland Grange Hall is now. And just to make sure we're clear, there's a difference between the Midland Community Hall, which is in the town of Midland, and the Midland Grange Hall, which is at the corner of Joe Wright Road and Tingley Lane. But do we still have the Spring Lake School photo number 18 handy? 18 and 23 are the 2 photos that we want to compare side by side on the... Well, we've got 23 on the camera now. Can we get 18 and put them both on there? No, not that one. Do we still, yeah, there you go. So for what it's worth, I just find it pretty striking, and I don't know, let's see, okay, there's a nice view. So we've got the Spring Lake School on the bottom of this photo, of this view, and then the Miller Hills School is the top photo.
And if we had time, some of the other schools are even more similar, in my opinion. The Swan Lake School and the Pine Grove School also looked quite similar to that design. We may not have time to that. In order for us to make sure we're getting through the schools at least, I think it would be good to maybe jump to 27. And I wanted to talk about the Henley schools right now. The Henley schools, as we have said, have merged all these other schools together, from Keno to almost to Bonanza and halfway to Merrill and that. This building here, if you can zero in on those cars, this was not a new building when I graduated there in 1968. And those cars are before my time. That building is in need of infrastructure improvement, and no connection to the museum. Just certainly my opinion that there's an opportunity for the bond measure presently to improve the infrastructure on that. The grade school where we attended isn't there anymore, and not only that, a whole generation of kids have gone through modular homes, which show up in photograph 28, that would also be included as an infrastructure improvement. It's so important for the communities to have that, and it's important for the students to have that. There's Henley Grade School now, and it doesn't have the community feel. It is certainly must be very challenging. Henley continues to make well-educated and do a good job of putting athletes and scholars out, but it does need infrastructure improvement. The next photograph is we used to call it the new school, but I just realized when I was putting this together that the first high school class to graduate from that would have been the year after me, which is 1969. So the first class to graduate from the Henley High School building was 1969. That building also needs infrastructure assistance. They're doing a good job with the infrastructure, with the budgets they have, but this bond measure is separate from any of the other budget problems and the entitlement problems and that sort of thing. It's, our ancestors have stepped up, the school boards have stepped up and made sure that we had schools since the time of settling, and it's time for us to step up to the plate as well.
We have a question that's come in by email from a viewer who asked what the history is of the Indians where the current Henley School area is. And we touched on that a little bit early in the program when we talked about Indians as well as white folks migrating to the Lost River area during the time of the sucker migration. So that territory, this entire area where we live here in Klamath Falls is sort of the overlap zone between the Klamath homeland and the Modoc homeland. But I think the farther south you get, the more predominant the Modocs were, especially all through that Lost River country. And so there were probably Indian villages scattered all along the Lost River area.
I'm sure that's the case, and just as the imported cattle did, the Indians had sustenance from gathering locusts, which I haven't found evidence of in the Lost River area, but certainly on the upper Klamath Lake. But there were reports, and I think there may be other photographs available of huge encampments, big gatherings of Indians, and untold amount of sucker fish that they were drying in this Henley area to survive the winter. So I think that answers the question.
We've just got a few minutes left, but there's one thing that I wanted to see us touch on just for a moment, and that's to again honor a couple of very famous Henley residents. Many people here still remember Dan O'Brien, but before Dan O'Brien, there was another Olympic athlete from the Henley area that made national news, and that was Ralph Hill. And I can't remember when Mr. Hill passed. What's it been? 15 years, probably, since he passed. Here's a photo from the Herald and News newspaper, and the photo was by Mike Quigley, who I happen to know was still working at the paper in the 1990s. So, but the story of Ralph Hill and his competition in the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles is just remarkable. Are you very familiar with that story, Richard?
He competed in the 1932 Olympics, as you said, and won the silver medal.
And could have had the gold, perhaps. Should have had.
Yes, I was going to hopefully read about that, but I'm not finding it. The competitor from Germany, as I recall, was running across the path of Ralph Hill as he was running down the last stretch on the 5,000 meters. So it was quite an interference. Avery Brundage and all of the U.S. contingent called that an unfair win. But back then, Ralph Hill, being the gentleman that he is, and the lack of aggression allowed there to be no contest of that. So Ralph Hill ended up with the silver medal. The photograph that the Herald and News, or at the museum, published to get information on shows the women's basketball team, which well, released, they were playing basketball. They were playing in the Short Barn, which you can still see the base of there at Short Road and Highway 39. On that photograph, identified second from the right is, I knew her as Bridget Marshall. I guess Olive Hill married Jack Marshall. And so his sister also, that's the basketball team there from Henley. And
Yeah, this photo really represents a kind of a who's who in the Henley history books, really. And Richard, the way we got the information on this photo is somewhat remarkable too. We ran this photo in the newspaper, and someone saw the photo and recognized the image, didn't know who was in it, but they contacted a cousin who lived in Texas. The cousin in Texas had this newspaper clipping in an old scrapbook that had belonged to Grandma. I'm sorry, I forgot who it was that had the photo, but they scanned it and sent it to us, and so we got all the names shown at left in this photo: Dorothy Short Dellinger. Let's see, the rest of the names are in here somewhere. Frances Short Hilliard, June Bradbury Terrell, Lois Heseltine Van Sype, Gladys Babe Latta Dixon, Lucille Dawson Faust, Mary Gober Tucker, Olive Hill Marshall, and on the far right, Marjorie Reeder Howe, who would marry Carol Howe, who was, both Carol and Marjorie continue to benefit the museum through the trust, of which the museum is a beneficiary. We receive an annual payment from the Howe Trust, and so we're very grateful to that couple. We've just got a minute or so left. Richard, what would you like to close out
well, I'd like
with?
to jump in, instead of closing it, just say some stories that have come out. My granddad recognized, and as did the history research that I did, that Mrs. Henley introduced a lot of good plants, as did many of the other settlers, and many of them not grown anymore, but so important to survival at the time. But one thing that is a good food source that my granddad was upset about was that she introduced dandelions. And
Makes a great salad.
Howard Manning knew the James T. Henley's the photographs. He had a son named James Thomas Henley, who also apparently went up to the Klondike Gold Rush, where he lost a hand and he had a hook for a hand. The Ferbers, when they came through into the community, camped outside the Fairclo homestead in the orchard there, on their way to settling near Miller Island. But now Frank and Sue Anderson, descendants of the Ferbers, now farm at the Henley Slough there. So the early settlement took place much earlier than much of the project. The Henley School is in need of help, and we can give it.
Well, I appreciate so much research that you've done on this, and obviously you've talked to some of your neighbors. We've got a nice audience here in the Government Center tonight, a lot of Henley history represented just in the folks who turned out for this program tonight, so we appreciate everyone coming out for that. We're going to just take one last look at an old Henley High School building here, and you know, whenever I look at these photos, I think about kids coming and going through those doors and leaning out the windows and yelling and playing, and a lot of years have come and gone. I don't know the dates of this building, when it was built, or when it was torn down.
It was I think that's the building that was moved to Midland in 1950.
A portion of it, yeah.
Oh.
So a good century of tremendous history, heritage, memories out in the Henley area. So again, you've been watching an episode of Klamath Memories, a history program presented by the Klamath County Museum. Our guest has been Richard Fairclo, longtime resident of the Henley area. This program was recorded on April 9th, 2013. This program can be viewed online at klamathmemories.com, along with about a dozen other programs that we've produced in this series. Thank you for watching.